Hello and welcome to this episode of The Language of Illness, a series of brief presentations on my book entitled The Language of Illness and published by Liberties Press. In this episode, we'll cover the distancing effect of medical language on the quality of the doctor-patient interaction. The time available for a doctor-patient interaction is increasingly becoming shorter and shorter, curiously and paradoxically, as medical advances continue apace. It begins, unfortunately, with doctors using medical speak or disease speak, which is the objective evidence of the problem. However, for the patient, they are using illness words. Illness is the lived experience of the disease. It begins, unfortunately, in medical school for medical students. 10,000 is the number of new words the average medical student learns in the first year of studentship. And that number grows to approximately 50,000 by the end of their training. By comparison, the average graduate student learns approximately 5,000 to 6,000 words when learning a new language such as French or German. And it's no surprise that patients will frequently say, as Molly Bloom did say in her famous soliloquy in Ulysses, when she recalls going to see her gynecologist, "Where did those old fellows get all the words they have? I wouldn't trust him too far." It begins as medical students are taught to exchange the familiar and replace it with the unfamiliar. Why do we need to change the word for an itch to pruritus, usually misspelled? Why should a nosebleed be called epistaxis or jaundice icterus? And why should a runny nose be rhinorrhea? What's wrong with a runny nose? And patients pick up on this. Famously, in Margaret Edson's wonderful screenplay about an unfortunate young woman diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, when the doctor tries to explain to her about her ovarian cancer and it being insidious, she interrupts him and explains to him what the word insidious actually means. But she is ultimately defeated by the language. She eventually looks straight to the audience and says, "They anatomize me, the doctors. My only defense is the acquisition of vocabulary." And Julia Darling, the English poet, who died actually from ovarian cancer, wrote several poems about this, in which she juxtaposed the language and the words that were on her mind with the brutal language, and in many cases unnecessary language, of medical speak. And it features also in several short stories of Laurie Moore, the American short story writer, who wrote about a young mother desperately trying to cope with the diagnosis of a serious cancer in her young child. And she refers to the medical words from the doctor. The words are like blows, because it's like speaking a different language. It's curious that as recent as 2015, the American President Barack Obama, launching the Precision Medicine Initiative, which is aimed at more precise diagnosis, actually neglected to comment about the imprecise language in medicine. If one wishes to go down a road of precision medicine, the first thing that should happen would be to improve the precision of the language. Look at some of these misnomers that are present in everyday medical speak. And doctors, of course, also use obfuscation and aggrandisement, often unwittingly. When doctors know the cause of something, they'll say it. The cause of your cough is smoking. But when they don't know the cause, they become vague and use bigger words like etiology or idiopathic or essential. And when they are actually responsible for some of the illness caused by doctors and nurses or hospitals is referred to as iatrogenic. No need for such a complicated word. The reform should begin with the medical record. Look at this chart entry and tell me what's wrong with it. Mr. White is a somewhat pleasant Irish unemployed labourer and a known cirrhotic. hospitalised complaining of dysphagia, history of angina, but claims it has not been a problem lately. He's a bad historian, but denies smoking and admits drinking 3 pints of beer each day. First of all, there's soft bigotry and stigmatising descriptors here. No one should be referred to as a cirrhotic. It's a person with cirrhosis. No one should be defined by their illness. It also distances the reader from the patient. Patients speak honestly. They don't need to claim something. They don't have to admit anything. Such pejorative language should be removed from medical speak. And lastly, this chart entry translates the patient's language and denies the patient their voice. Patients do not complain of dysphagia. They complain of difficulty swallowing. They don't come in and say they have angina. They usually complain of pain in the chest. The importance of the patient's words became clear to me when I analysed Charles Darwin's illness. For many years, decades, people have wondered about the cause of Darwin's myriad of symptoms. The answer was found in his own words, in his own diary, and that enabled me to make a diagnosis of Darwin published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology some years ago. And what about this term bad historian? There is no such thing as a bad historian. There are only bad history takers, and they're the doctors and nurses. The history is always informative to a careful listener. It's a very dangerous term to say bad historian because occasionally it might risk missing something like delirium. Now, doctors communicate with their patients and vice versa with their body language as well as their words. The famous sex symbol of a previous era, Mae West, used to say, "I speak 2 languages, body and English." Most of this falls within the realm of common sense, but doctors need to be continually aware that their body language has a profound influence on their patients. It should never happen that a doctor presents himself or herself as a person wishing to be elsewhere. Patients are acutely sensitive to subtle moves and gestures in their doctors, just as doctors are aware of subtle moves, a glance away, a tear, the way a patient dresses. The same is true for patients judging doctors. Then, of course, there is the modern problem of the third presence in the doctor-patient interaction. This is a situation where medicine has gone digital and the doctor is staring continually at the computer screen to the exclusion of the patient. One way around this is to employ a scribe or, at very minimum, allow the patient to share the screen. It would be very easy to say for which person in this picture is the episode a crisis or routine. The body language of the person on the right, the doctor, clearly is someone in command, someone in their routine, someone speaking about diseases, but for whom most of the responsibility for the outcome of disengagement lies. The person on the left is in crisis, vulnerable, and speaks a different language, illness. Language should not compound this asymmetry between the doctor and the patient. That's it for this episode. Join me next time on The Language of Illness when we look at a different aspect of the entire topic of how patients interact with their carers.